Welcome to Wales Tech Week 2021. Thank you to our partners. Enjoy the session.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the main stage for Agritech Day of Wales Tech Week. I'm absolutely delighted that you can join us and to join our expert panel for this morning's session. My name is Rhian Hayward. I'm the CEO of AberInnovation, which is the Aberystwyth Innovation and Enterprise Campus. And we've got a great lineup for you today, and you can see our panelists here in front of you. The topic for today, just so you know you're in the right place, is how are agri-tech solutions advancing our futures for the better? And the way we're going to run this session is I'm going to invite each of our panelists to talk for perhaps 10 minutes to give you some of their thoughts on that topic, particularly the what, why, and how. That's really what we want to cover. Each individual panelist has got their own story to tell, and I would encourage them to say a few things about their own organisation and what the aims are of that organisation, but just to give us some certainties and some speculations, really, about the future and agri-tech and some of those solutions that are coming down the line that we really are betting on for a brighter future for agri-food. I will be looking for your comments and questions in the chat function. Please do submit them. We really want our panel to answer your questions about this topic, and I will do my very best to facilitate that after each of our panelists have had a chance to speak to you today. And we'll have some questions of our own just in our back pockets also to put into the mix. In the Q&A session, we're going to use a very conventional methodology of raising a hand. I think that's what we're going to do when any of our panelists would like to contribute to that discussion. And we'll see how it goes. So I haven't warned anybody about who I'm going to ask first to speak, but I'm looking at my panelists. I'm going to invite Alison Kingston Smith first from Aberystwyth University to speak to us for a few minutes. So Alison, if you'd like to introduce yourself and also then talk to us about the what, why and how for agri-tech solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhian. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Alison Kingston Smith. I'm the Director of Research at IBERS at Aberystwyth University. So a little bit about IBERS. Is a long-established department of the university formed through a merger of the Institute of Grassland and Environmental Research, BBSRC Institute. So we have possibly a unique mix of both academic and market-driven research activity. I'm sure Paul will say later something about our close relationship with breeding companies. Last year we celebrated 100 years of plant breeding success, really generating improved varieties for grassland agriculture. So IBERS' remit is to conduct research and teaching primarily related to improvement of food, environment, human health. Obviously, along with many other organisations recently, we're very aware of the impact of climate change and how we can contribute to both the mitigation and adaptation to climate change, including both reduction of greenhouse gases and how to actually mitigate for that production. So I think it should be fairly obvious why we're doing this work. It's for environmental sustainability, social well-being, and of course there's an economic benefit. We want to ensure sustainability of our national industries, whether they be the primary producers or the allied industries, the service providers, all the food chain. Okay, so how have we made a difference? I'm not going to go into specifics because I think things might come up in conversations, but just talk fairly high level, and I'll be happy to answer specific questions. But I would say our main contribution has been in the development of new varieties. And again, I don't want to steal any of Paul's thunder, but sort of over 100 years, we've seen targets for grassland development move from simply making more grass to feed more animals to now identification of quality traits. So how can we make the best forage we can for our animals? And this contributes very much to the current agenda of having fewer animals on fewer land, the competition for land resource. So we're very involved in breeding of grass, oats, clover, and all that experience has allowed us to diversify into other crops. Mike will no doubt talk about the advances in miscanthus. So this is an energy grass which can be used for alternative cropping purposes, both as a greenhouse gas mitigator and bioenergy crop. We also have ongoing fundamental research into development of new tools for agritech. And this is agritech in its widest sense. So things like animal diagnostics. Fluke is a real problem for the livestock industry. So development of rapid tests that can identify infected animals will allow precision application of medical treatments where necessary and not overuse, thereby contributing to the agenda for reducing overuse of antibiotics and similar. We also have to mention the recently established Centre for Excellence in Bovine TB. This is Glyn Hewinson and his team. Developing, again, diagnostics, rapid diagnostics, allowing increased profitability and sustainability in the livestock industry. It's heartbreaking to think of destruction of healthy animals because of test result. And supporting these advances, and we're using state-of-the-art technologies. With facilities from detailed biological imaging and phenotyping, so understanding what a sample actually looks like, whether this is at the molecular, the spectrophotometric, or the chemical building block of it, and with excellent facilities. So I'd like to just highlight our SEAL small ruminant facility we have, which allows for measurement of metabolism by sheep, goats, other small ruminants during feed evaluation. The centre of the SEAL facility, and also Vet Hub, which is the newly established Class 2 and 3 facility for veterinary research. These are all very linked to our new opening of the School of Veterinary Sciences, linked to the RVC. So what I would say is what IBERS is doing is very much looking forward, using its experience and excellent science that we have here to look at the new challenges and see where we have an opportunity to contribute to improvement of life. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Alison. Hard in just a few minutes to give an overview of such a lot of activity at the university. And as you say, Aberystwyth University's track record in crop breeding, for example, goes back now over 100 years. So a lot has transpired in that time. But what you touched on there was that topic of the impact of excellent scientific research is something I hope that we'll come back to a few times in this session, because it's close to a lot of people's sort of day jobs that'll be on this call now. But looking at, you mentioned a lot of the facilities that Aberystwyth University has put in place to translate those research outcomes into commercial and marketable products and services. And so a question we might come back to when the other panelists have spoken for a moment is actually how do we squeeze the value out of all the university research? What do we have to have in place that sits perhaps between universities and the research that they do and the companies that take products to market? What are the gaps? And I would say in the Welsh context, because it's Wales Tech Week, so we can talk about that for a minute. What are we missing in terms of infrastructure, and what do we do really well? I think would be something perhaps worth highlighting toward the end of this session. Thank you for that. So I'm going to move to Paul next, Paul Billings from Germinal. A really nice segue, because Germinal is one of Aberystwyth University's long-standing partners. Paul, would you like to take centre stage for some minutes, please?
Of course, thank you, Rhian. All right, I'm going to try to spoil da, everyone, and I hope I haven't offended anyone with my Welsh pronunciation. My name's Paul Billings. I'm from a company called Germinal. You can see the G above me there. We're a sixth-generation family business, been going since 1825, owned by the same family throughout that period. So I assume we're going to have a big party in 4 years' time, which we're looking forward to. We've got several sites. We've got a site in GB, based in Lincolnshire. We've got a site in Northern Ireland, site in Southern Ireland in a lovely place called Horse and Jockey, which is not a pub, and a site down in New Zealand as well. We focus on forage products, mainly for farmers, and also a bit on amenity grasses and wild flora area, but our main focus is on forage crops. And as a business, we see ongoing investment in research and development and innovation as key to surviving perhaps another 6 generations of the family business. So it's really important to us that we innovate in that area, and we pass those innovations on to farmers. We've been working with IBERS since, I think, about 1987. So I think that's just over a third of the time that the Institute has been breeding grasses since George Stapleton started it all. So it is a considerably long collaboration and partnership that has been very beneficial for both parties, I think. I'm a director of the business. I'm based down in Taunton in Somerset, and I'm responsible for the GB activities and also our connections with IBERS and spreading that out through the group of companies we have. Just before I start talking about the research, I just want to touch on a couple of things I've learned from, or picked up from working in farming for all of my life, and I have worked in this industry since I left school. Just how hard farmers work. They work incredibly hard, and it is very difficult to... is everyone hearing me, or is there a problem? I see there's a note in the comments.
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, it's incredibly hard, farmers' work, and the effort they have to put in, the hours they have to put in, and I think those of us in research and development need to understand how difficult it is for farmers to get new concepts and new technologies into their business, because they're already working extremely hard. And I think you really touched on that just now, Rhian, and I think we do need to come back to that, how new technologies are adopted and taken up on farms. So I think it's really very, very important. The other thing I've come to my mind over the last couple of years, probably the last year more than anything, is how hard it's going to be for farmers to get to net zero. We've got a lot of supply chains pushing farmers now to get to net zero anytime between 2025 and 2035. They're incredibly short periods in farming. Farming is a long-term thing. It takes a long-term time to breed animals, and it takes a long time to breed plants. To make changes in that time is very difficult, and it is going to be extremely hard to get to net zero. But I also know how much it matters to farmers that they do, and that they continue to farm and to produce quality food for the nation. Right, so that's just a bit about me and what I think. What are we doing in terms of research? And I'm going to try and put this into a small nutshell. Just a quick comment first before I explain it. What we are trying to achieve is the efficient use of nutrients in the process of converting plant proteins into animal proteins. That is what we are trying to achieve. When you think how animal proteins are produced, you get a farmer, a Welsh farmer, and he will have some grassland, and he'll apply nutrients to it in the form of nitrogen, phosphate, and potash in the main. The plants will then grow and they will form plant proteins, particularly from that nitrogen, and they'll have that in them. And then the farmer is very clever. He's managed to employ a whole range of small little factory units that go out onto this grassland and eat it. And then they convert those plant proteins, this is in the rumen of an animal, they convert those plant proteins into animal proteins, because plant proteins in grass can't be digested by humans, whereas animal proteins such as meat and milk can be. The problem we've got in that process is it leaks, and it leaks from beginning to end. It leaks in the production of the original nutrients, in the production of fertilizer, the way the plants use them, and then the conversion of plant protein into animal protein is also a problem. So they're the three areas of research that we're working on, and the things we're trying to put forward solutions for, so farmers can improve that system. So if you look at the first one, which is the supplying of nitrogen, a lot of nitrogen is supplied by a mineral ammonium nitrate, and ammonium nitrate is well, to produce a ton of ammonium nitrate, you will release between 1 and 3 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, and that's just to produce it before you use it. So it's quite a dirty product to produce. So are there other ways we can supply nitrogen in particular to forage plants? And of course, there's one obvious one everyone knows about, which is clover. So clovers will grow in grassland and they will supply between about 150 and 400 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, of which they're very generous. They make about half of that available to the companion plant to grow with. So they are a really good source of nitrogen, and they're also very palatable for stock to eat. What we are trying to do in those legumes is to make them more resilient. There are parts of the world that can't grow those legumes, and in this part of the world, we are seeing different climates. The climate is changing. We're seeing more severe droughts in the summer. We're seeing very odd springs like we've just had, when it went very cold and dry in April, then very warm and wet in May. So our climate is changing, so we need to be resilient to that. So we've produced white clovers, which white clovers traditionally grow with a stolon, which is an overground stem. It runs along the top of the surface, and new plantlets form off it. That means that part of the plant, that stolon, is susceptible to damage, and it is susceptible to drying out in times of drought, etc. So we've crossed white clover with Caucasian clover, which is a Trifolium ambiguum. That's found down in Australia. It is a great plant. It's got rhizomes as well as stolons, so those root systems are much more protected, but it doesn't yield any forage. So it's taken us a long time to back cross that into traditional white clover, so we get the forage yield of white clover along with that dual root system that we can use to protect the white clover in terms of drought and also in cold as well. And we've been growing that in Japan, and it's gone down to -40 and been the only plant surviving in a forage position. So that's great. The other thing we know about forage legumes is that red clover is a real powerhouse. Red clover's got a protective protein in it. It's protected by a polyphenol oxidase, which means the protein breaks down slower in the rumen and the animal can capture more of it. And I think everyone would use red clover if they possibly can, but red clover doesn't survive in a grazing situation. It only lasts a couple of years at most. It grows from a single crown point, and it suffers damage very easily. So we've developed red clovers that grow in the way that white clover do. So they grow with a stolon, and they'll survive in a grass sward, tightly grazed, as well as white clover will. And you get the added benefit of that improved protein. So that's how we're looking at the position of collecting or supplying protein to animals. When it comes to how the plant then uses that protein, also uses that energy to grow and to create plant proteins, there are 2 areas we're looking at here. One on nitrogen, so how effectively plants use nitrogen. So how much dry matter yield, how much biomass can you get for each kilo of nitrogen applied, whichever its source of nitrogen is. So improving that is very important, and we've got big programs working on that. And the second area is a bit more interesting. White clover, I just described as a great plant, fixes all this free nitrogen, but it does have a very large requirement for phosphate, much higher than grasses do. And phosphate is an interesting element in the fact that it's a limited supply. It's a finite supply. We dig it up. It comes from rock phosphate. And the phosphate supplies in the world are limited. There are big supplies in Russia. There's reasonably good supplies in North America, and the other big supply points in China. There are province called Wuhan. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's been relatively famous recently. And they're great. There is rock phosphate out there, but it isn't in the best places for us to obtain it. The Americans want to keep theirs, and buying it from Russia and China has its own issues. It is also predicted that somewhere between 50 and 80 years, phosphate will run out, or rock phosphate will run out, and we'll need to do something else. So we're developing white clovers that will grow without applied phosphate and at very, very low natural soil levels of phosphate. And we have some of those in early development. Hopefully in the next few years they'll come through. The third area then to look at is how the plant proteins, once you produce the plant proteins, are converted into animal proteins, and this is done in the rumen. And there are two thought areas we're looking at here. One which we've got into the marketplace already, and I'm sure some of you will already have heard about, which is the other high sugar grasses. So what you have in a grass plant when an animal eats it, the animal will graze it off. If it's a cow, it will ruminate on it. It will turn it into a bolus, and it will swallow it into the rumen. And at that point, most of the plant cells within that grass bolus are still actually alive. Only a few would have been damaged in the chewing process. When they get into the rumen, that plant will find that it's quite a hostile environment. The rumen's about 39 degrees centigrade. It's dark, it's anaerobic, there's no air, and the plant will immediately begin to decompose. The cell walls will open up, and the contents of the cells will flood into the rumen. Grass has around about anything between 12 and 18, maybe even 20% protein in it, and the rumen microflora need to capture that protein, turn it into amino acids, and that is the building blocks of meat and milk. But there's too much protein at that stage, and the rumen microflora aren't active enough to be able to capture it all. So what other high sugar grasses do is they increase the level of sugar in the cell and slightly reduce the level of protein, which puts things more in balance. So when that protein floods out into the rumen, it floods out with extra energy, with extra sugar, feeding the microflora, and the microflora can capture more of the protein. And we see capture rates going up by about 5 percentage points. So if the a rumen on standard grass will literally only capture about a quarter of the protein that goes into it, about 25%. By using high sugar grass, you can get that up to 30%. And that protein that's breaking down in the rumen and not being captured is breaking down into ammonia and nitrous oxide, two very potent greenhouse gases. So we're reducing greenhouse gases at the same time. The third area is an area I'm surprised you didn't touch on, Alison, which is plant-mediated proteolysis or nitrogen proteolysis in the rumen. That is slowing down the breakdown of that protein. And we have initial work done outside of the rumen in simulated rumens, which would indicate that crossing ryegrass with fescues from North Africa will actually make the plant so much more stress tolerant that when it breaks down, the protein breaks down more slowly, and that also gives the rumen microflora more time to capture it. We've actually crossed those into the high sugar grass in the hope that we'll have something with slower breakdown of protein with more active microflora to capture it as it goes on. So they're the main areas we're working on at the moment. I think nutrients are really essential, and maximum use of we can make of them is what we need to do going forward. Thank you, Rhian.
Thank you, Paul. That's great. But I suspect you've just scratched the surface of the amount of work that's going on in terms of optimizing crops to help solve some of these challenges that we've got, this leaky system that you mentioned that we have in agriculture. And I definitely would like to return to some of those topics when we come to our discussion. One of the things perhaps to highlight my limited understanding of crop breeding, though, however, even I do appreciate which is what a long-term endeavour it is. And maybe that's something we can talk about when we come to the Q&A, is that when you come to that idea of pulling, research, discovery work from a university, from the knowledge base, and putting it out there in the world. When it comes to the area of crop breeding and development, that's a commitment, isn't it, commercially, which I think is as much part of how we develop solutions in agriculture as the research itself. So thank you very much for that, Paul. We'll come back to you. I think what I'd like to do now, following on topically, is perhaps go to Michael Squance from Terravesta. Terravesta is another long-term collaborator of Aberystwyth University, and continuing this theme, perhaps, Michael, if you'd like to talk to us about the work that Terravesta is doing and the solutions you see for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So morning, everyone. Thanks, Rhian. So I'm Michael Squance. I'm Terravesta's Director of Science and Technology. Terravesta are a fairly young company. We've been around about 9 years now, and we work on establishing miscanthus. So miscanthus is a carbon negative bioenergy crop that's grown in the UK. It originates from Asia, originally. There is a variety out there called Miscanthus giganteus that has been used historically. However, we are working closely with Aberystwyth University to develop new varieties. Those new varieties grow faster, grow better, giving us more yield. The goal behind bioenergy in the UK is to offset our use of fossil fuels. Most of that currently is done along the lines of burning. So most of our biomass that we generate as a company will go to dedicated power plants specifically designed to burn bioenergy crops. They are net zero. So the power generation has no carbon footprint. And Miscanthus actually stores carbon as it grows. It sequesters carbon under the soil as it grows. And we've learned more about that through collaborations with Aberystwyth University and other universities over years. We've been able to model all of that through advanced sensing and data gathering. We operate with several hundred growers in the UK, and we try to help them identify land on their farm which may be unproductive or maybe difficult to farm or may have some environmental issues, i.e. flooding. There's a whole remit of reasons why a farmer may wish to take a field out of commercial agricultural food production and swap it into biomass. We see many of our farmers who do so actually then see gains on their farm by taking those intensive fields which are hard to farm and swapping them into something like Miscanthus, which is a low input crop. It requires very little from fertilizer. It needs a few years to settle in and help it grow, but after that you can almost forget about it. You come in once a year and harvest it, and that biomass then goes into a long-term contract which we back up with security through the power plants through our long-term contracts. Obviously, burning biomass obviously doesn't sound great for the environment, and although it is zero at the power plant end, obviously there is more we could do on that. So things like bioenergy carbon capture and storage, known as BECCS, is one major area of research that a lot of universities are looking into, whereby you burn biomass and you also capture the carbon from the power plant. On a good field, a good crop, Miscanthus, the above ground biomass can offset 26 tonne of CO2. If we could capture that as part of the burning process through a BECCS process, there is a huge carbon saving. On top of that, as I said, we sequester carbon. We've recently published a study with University of Hohenheim out of Germany, and we can see that Miscanthus per hectare per year can put away 2.35 tonne of CO2 equivalents, which is a huge carbon saving. Add to that what we could do with the above ground. And also there's the bioconversion processes that Aberystwyth are particularly interested in through the Beacon Centre, which is based out of Aberystwyth, where there is huge interest into looking at the different end uses for biomass. As I said, most of it goes for burning, but actually the reality is that through careful processing, we could actually replace a lot of our dependencies on fossil fuels by managing that biomass supply chain. It is something the UK government are very aware of. The Climate Change Committee have put out a number which is 23,000 hectares of bioenergy crop need to be planted every year from 2025 up to 2050 as part of our goal to reach a net zero economy by 2050. That is a huge ask. 23,000 hectares is a huge step up in the bioenergy sector. Obviously, there are many bioenergy crops, and Miscanthus will play a part in all of that. So we aren't expecting to have to start planting 23,000 hectares of Miscanthus very quickly, but we are still going to have to see a massive ramp up in our planting. So that's where we work with Aberystwyth and other universities. So in Aberystwyth, we've been working to develop seed-based Miscanthus hybrids by breeding new varieties from wild collections that have been done by Aber by going out to the countries of origin where these plants originally grow, bringing them back to Aberystwyth and breeding new varieties for not just for UK climate, but also for different end uses. Obviously, with the biomass burning end, we're looking for high calorific value, but in those bioconversion ends where we've got partners working on things like, we've got partners who develop using Miscanthus material for dashboards in cars, all the way through to soundproofing boards, to bioplastics, and all of these have a different requirement. And that's one of the beautiful things we can do in plant breeding, is that we could actually work with our partners at Aberystwyth University to actually find different varieties and different chemical compositions and different performances to match those end uses. As we're here to talk as Tech Week as well, Terravesta have a huge research into data mining and machine learning. That is my area of interest. We collect huge amounts of data. We've recently started undertaking drone photography of all of our fields. One of the things I should mention with miscanthus is it is a perennial crop. It will stand in the field for 15 to 20 years. So obviously with every crop getting the establishment is incredibly important, but with a crop that we're going to leave alone for 15 years, getting that first establishment is key to getting a long-term stable biomass supply. So we do a lot of drone agronomy, and we're using that to monitor our establishment, learn more as to why certain crops establish in certain areas better. Alongside our new varieties, we can actually test these at large scale and collect huge amounts of data. We also are developing precision planting systems so that we can take these, we can be sure that when we're planting out in the field, we know where all of our plants are, and we can monitor those through the life of their growth and understand the development processes. And I think as well, longer term, if we are going to be reliant on a biomass supply chain in the UK, there needs to be investment and work, and this is an area of interest we have, into forecasting of crop performance. If we are going to use this to prop up the energy sector from other renewables like wind and solar, where they are less predictable because they're climate based and they've changed by the weather, biomass can provide a stability in that power generation chain by being a fixed source, but we need to be able to predict that better so we can build a smarter grid and actually be able to provide biomass at large quantities. Going back to the plant breeding end, it is an area where we've worked with AberInnovation for 7 years now, and we've developed several hybrids that provide different traits from those currently used. They provide a different planting methodology via seed, which will allow us to scale up. Seed technology is one thing that has never existed in miscanthus before, and that's something that we in AberInnovation have brought to the fore. We are still in development of this, but this will provide us with this ability to scale up to this government prescribed 23,000 hectares a year. It's going to be a big upscaling of biomass and a big learning that we can use technology to aid ourselves with. Areas like remote sensing, where we can map fields and understand longer term the performance impacts, are going to be key to us. And central to all of the work we are doing is a piece of software we've developed in-house that we use to communicate with our growers. We call this the Harvest Hub, and it will launch this year. It's an online platform that we provide to all of our growers, and will eventually be able to provide to researchers to actually centralize all of the data we are collecting. From my perspective, when it comes to research and learning, actually data integration is one of the keys that we need, key things we need to be able to develop these things further. Because obviously, as we go to these different things, from the precision farming to knowing what was planted where, to the remote sensing to be able to map fields out, to our drone agronomy to be able to understand where the plants are and tie that back through to our plant breeding programs, we need to actually make sure that we're using all of the data we can gather in the most effective way. So we developed this system which will act as a interactive interface to our growers, allowing them to provide us with information as well as us provide them with information. But by centralizing our data, we can start to identify things like fields that are starting to perform poorly compared to their neighbors, and we can start to do some sort of machine learning and data analyzing in order to work out what is the optimum condition to ensure a stable biomass supply for the future. Obviously, as well, there's a whole complexity in there, as well as crops as they grow under different climatic conditions. As years change, it's going to be the same miscanthus plant in the field for 15 years, but the one thing that will change will be the climate, and understanding how that climate impacts on the biochemistry and the yield of the plant will also have a long-term effect on that biomass supply chain. As obviously, as the climate changes and the crops change, what market should those crops be supplied to? And actually optimizing that could have a huge impact on the UK economy and the economy of the globe, and actually ensuring that we can develop things carbon neutral and actually start to reduce greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Excellent. Perfect timing. Perfect. Thank you. You've covered a lot of ground there, and something that I definitely picked up upon, and your own expertise in sort of, well, you mentioned data management and big data, and that coming together, of course, of crop breeding as a discipline and a skill set, and all things, and we'll hear from Stephen in a minute, and Geraint in terms of computer science, for want of a better skills discipline as well, that interdisciplinary work and how we do that to best effect. And so I'd like to come back to that perhaps in the chat to ask you all really about skills gaps, what do educators have to be doing here to make sure people are ready to join companies like Terravesta and Germinal. That's something we can use this platform to discuss, because I expect a lot of people listening will be interested in that. Because if we're talking about future solutions, it's the tech, but it's also the people involved. So thank you very much indeed. I think next I'm going to go to Stephen Christie from Agxio to talk to us about the company and Agritech Solutions. Stephen, over to you.
Rhian, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Introducing Agxio very briefly, we're based at the AIEC. We also have development and research centres in Cambridge and overseas. It's a relatively young company, formed a little over 2 years ago with the support of the Development Bank of Wales. But actually, we launched our first real commercial products early in December of last year. Our background is around 30 years of building particularly sort of high-tech, highly regulated companies, working across a range of industries. And I guess really the distillation that comes to sort of Rhian's heart of Rhian's question is, when we looked at the agricultural industry, we felt there was a need to bring a number of disciplines together. So we formed Agxio very much, I guess, with a core kernel of domain knowledge, with data science, with technology specialists, and I guess an important dimension then it was also commercialization. So a lot of our background is helping other companies, as well as ourselves, build and scale and globalize technologies that again have real world applied at sort of value elements. So I guess the sort of core of the sort of genesis of part of the analysis was the overriding sort of global trend around Industry 4.0. And for those who aren't familiar with 4.0, it's very much driven by Klaus Schwab, president of the World Economic Forum, as part of it, really, I guess, an initiative of recognizing that going through most industries, there's been a high degree of technological innovation in terms of computerization. But really, I guess the next part, which is the 4.0, is around digitization. So the greater availability and access of data, looking at things like Internet of Things, sensors, drones. There were so many ways of capturing data. The question then is, having captured it, what do you do with it? And I think that's in the heart of the farming industry. That was something which, again, in the very early days of forming Agxio, was something which we were finding more and more people coming to us and looking for ideas around innovation, monetization of data, and really gets changing from a world which is largely driven by heuristics into a world which is able to really sort of focus on improved outcomes, whether they be yields, disease types, economic elements, prediction elements, or indeed really more around actually ensuring there's a higher degree of certainty. So in many respects, again, a number of farmers shared with us that they often only have possibly 20 or 30 goes essentially at their job in their career to get it right. And so the question was, could we build some expert systems that enabled better decision making and better operational effectiveness? So that's really the core of what Agxio is about. And now the why is, I'm sure, obvious to a lot of people sort of listening elements. I mean, clearly, we all recognise that the world is changing. There's more people. The diets are changing. But interestingly, the whole issue around sustainability, around increased regulation, around again changes in the nature of how people want to produce food. There's food security. We've seen again through the nature of sort of COVID elements that again, people have started to recognize actually that their food value chains essentially were not operating or as secure or as sustainable and scalable as they anticipated. And that really is very much at the heart of what we're trying to address in Agxio. Our focus is on both animal health, and particularly in terms of some of their health aspects, and I'll come on to some of the specifics of what we have done so far in that field. But we're also focusing around arable in both traditional and also total controlled environment solutions. And part of, again, some of the challenges around that, some drive directly into the trending towards net zero and sustainability. Other parts are actually still in very early days of technological advancement. So some of the challenges, for example, that we've been posed is that whilst there's increasing desire to do more controlled environment agriculture, the energy costs are for many crops prohibitive. So that needs to be addressed. And so there's still quite a lot of ways of sort of changing essentially the way that some of this sort of technology needs to be structured. So we focus briefly on the how, and I apologize to everybody, I'm not going to do this justice at all in the time that we've got, but I'm more than happy on another occasion to go through the detail. But in relatively simple terms, and I'll just showcase a few of the solutions that we've covered. What we did, we spent a good part of the last 2 years building essentially a platform of technology components and solutions which drives into something for the technologists, which is building no-code and low-code solutions to automate the role of the data scientist. So what we've been able to do is to essentially build a series of robots, essentially, that can build solutions around particular problems. Now, it's a huge range of scope. It goes from numerical to textual to image type data. So and really, it's a platform that they then can build and accelerate systems that would traditionally have taken years to build in literally weeks and months. Now, we haven't just done that in the last 2 years. We actually tried to do it with Cambridge around 10 years ago, but the technologies were not advanced enough. They now are. So having built that, then we've started to look at some specific use cases, partnering with some companies, particularly sort of companies in Wales, to then drive through solutions that, again, have been a challenge to this point. So if I just showcase a few, if I may, Rhian, the first is around controlled environments. So we're working with some tremendous organizations, people like Digital Farming and TechTubby, looking at essentially automating the whole process of the controlled environment. So we've got a number of pilots, for example, growing strawberries. So we deal with a lot of the command center in terms of robotics, what gets turned on when, as well as a lot of the analysis in terms of looking for disease vectors and ways of optimizing and improving the crop. A lot of analytics, a lot of the components that again have been sort of touched on to date. It's a very, very data-rich environment. But importantly, you could lift those containers, put them anywhere in the world, and grow essentially any optimized sort of crops. And so again, highly automated and definitely I guess a sort of trend for the future. And importantly, also includes the energy analytics for that. So that's one. Second one, again, using exactly the same sort of technology components again. So a lot of these automated machine learning elements. We're also looking at disease in animals, looking at both the health as well as performance elements. So we've been extremely effective identifying, for example, COVID markers and biomarkers in livestock in terms of looking at parasites, in terms of analysis. We've also been able to do with IBERS in Aberystwyth a lot of work around biosequencing. So working with companies like PhytoOrigins and Equibiome elements, that again has had some very significant new discoveries, which again were way beyond any sort of human scale analysis you could have done on the data. And the final one, very briefly, I would just like to again showcase is what we're doing in traditional farming. So working with again projects and farms like Farming Connect. We're looking at ingesting a lot of the sensor data elements. We have automated, again, and the regulation will catch up in due course, the ability to do, for example, crop scouting using drones. So literally these drones can fly themselves sort of on an agreed pattern so that you can do crop scouting in a very precise and repeatable manner elements. But importantly, having got all of that data back, What we then do is we then put context on it, because it's very similar to what happened in other industries, like for example, the medical industry that found themselves overloaded with data. The challenge was the context. So if a farmer, for example, doesn't want to just know what the humidity or the temperature in his barn is, what we would look to do is saying we would basically repurpose that on the basis of being able to highlight to him what, for example, the pneumonia risk for his animals are and what he should do about it. And again, with the goal that a lot of that is automated, so that you've essentially got a lifetime of expertise in agriculture from day one, particularly in terms of the digitization, digital millennial, new entry parts to the industry. We feel as if it's the trend is really about sort of new technology innovation, having a real world purpose. And the final point I would say is, because one of the challenges around precision agriculture, which everybody hears a lot about, is it's often not valid at real farm scale. So our focus in Agxio is making sure that there is a real farm solution relevance to any of the technologies that we develop. Thank you, Rhian.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That was a sort of a dash through, and I know there's a lot more to say on a lot of these topics around artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, all of these amazing disciplines and skills. Whoops, that's my timer, sorry, being brought into the agricultural world. And I think what we're hearing from the panelists here is we are putting together a real spectrum of work amongst the organisations that you represent, from the research and the crop breeding, animal health, right through to some of these new technologies coming into the sector. So lots to touch on. And the point you mentioned last there, Stephen, about deployment on farm, Paul mentioned it earlier, right at the beginning of the session, something we will come back to now about that real world deployment and how much of this can you actually get into farming businesses. So last but by no means least, I'd like to invite Geraint Hughes from Dewin Tech to talk to us about the work that you're doing, Geraint, and I'll hand over to you.
Diolch yn fawr, bore da Rhian a bore da pawb sy'n gwrando. Good morning all. There is some background noise here, there's some building work going on, but I think the microphone hopefully will sort that out. I am concerned about the future of the traditional Welsh family farm. There are going to be huge pressures on that in the future with the changes in the payment structures, the Brexit impact, or more precisely, the impact of the free trade agreement, which looks likely to be the way the UK government is going to go down, and climate change and all kinds of other factors. But to stop going all negative, let's go positive. And one of the biggest opportunities, I think, for Welsh agriculture is to embrace and lead the revolution in agri-tech. And with Dewin Tech, and you can go over to the website www.dewin.tech. It's there on the bottom of my screen. We're trying to play a very, very small part in that revolution in Wales. And there's no reason why we cannot lead in that sector. We've got globally competitive sports teams, and we can be globally competitive in agri-tech. And we really need to give ourselves the confidence to go out there and do this ourselves and lead the agri-tech. So Dewin is a new company. It's 3 months old, so it's looking enviously at Paul and hearing about the 6th generation in his in the family business in Germinal. We're at the totally opposite end, and do bear that in mind. We are very much new kids on the block, which probably means that there's an element of naivety around what we're doing. But we've got aspirations, and we'll try and do a small contribution to the agenda. I come from a farming background and a food background, so it's been a steep learning curve over the last 2 or 3 years, whilst I've been engaging more and more within the tech community. There is interest in farming with technology. There is the danger of thinking that farming is not innovative. I really do challenge that myth. If farmers see value, and this is the crux of agri-tech, if farmers see value, they will use it. There was a survey done, I was involved in a few years on the Royal Welsh Showground, and that interestingly concluded that the 2 most impactful pieces of technology in Welsh farming over the last few decades has been the quad bike, and interestingly, the mobile phone, which has opened the doors to new ways of managing farms and with new applications. So farming is ready to be innovative. However, there are some key barriers, and I really like Ben's question on the comments, which sort of got us thinking what the barriers are. In farming, I can see smart farming getting more and more interested, genomics, social networks. We really shouldn't forget social networks and how that enables farmers to deal directly with the customers, or more importantly, the consumers. Vertical farming, as Stephen mentioned there, is an area that's with a lot of potential in rural Wales, whether it's farmers or other rural businesses. You don't need to have 50 acres to be involved in vertical farming. You can have a large garden or a garden shed. Virtual reality is there as a tool for training, and more and more I can see people thinking about blockchain technology, which could address traceability challenges. And then you've got artificial intelligence and machine learning. So those are some of the tech which I think can add value to Welsh agriculture. So to concentrate just a minute or two on Dewin Tech, we're a new company, and we've got a solution on the market called the Open Close Notification System. That is all based around the LoRaWAN network, the long-range wireless area network, which makes the Internet of Things possible in wide open spaces, in particular rural areas. We see ourselves with Dewin, and I'm a co-founder with my partner Mainir in Dewin, as an enabler to develop some of these technologies into the marketplace. We're not techies by any stretch of the imagination. I think I'm maybe just one small step ahead of Mr. and Mrs. Average. And our interest is to take the wonderful technology that's going on in Wales and try and work with the developers and the founders of this technology and build the routes to market to them in our own little way. It's a spin-off from Lavan Consultancy Group, and the Open Close Notification System is a partnership with Rob Shepherd from Evometrics. So that allows you to track and monitor various assets. So on the farm environments, that could be a gate, a shed door, or anything with a lid, to notify the farmer when he or she, we've got to remember with farming to change our language. It's not all men in farming. We've got women doing equally good jobs in farming. So he or she might want to get some information when a gate is opened during particular times of the day, or to avoid when the typical example that's been floated, when a gate is left open by walkers, and then you've got the expensive job of splitting up livestock which might have bred during the time they were allowed to mix up, and then that cost dearly to the farm. So that's the Dewin Tech commercial solution on the market now. And we've been lucky to attract some significant funding for us, seed funding effectively through the AgriHack, through the MSpark Science Park on Anglesey, which has allowed us to invest time and resources to develop Dewin Dŵr, Dewin Water, which is all about using sensors to monitor water quality on farms, and also Dewin Mw, which is about using artificial intelligence to monitor behavior of dairy cattle. So we're now setting up these development trials on farms. We have been involved, and we are involved in other longer term projects using LoRaWAN network sensors, using the European Innovation Partnership funding. So we've got 3 farms involved in replication of LoRaWAN trials. And as far as I can see, we're the only one doing that kind of thing in the UK. 3 dairy farms where we're using the sensor network to minimize the risk of runoff pollution from slurry, which is a very topical point of discussion in Wales with the new legislation on slurry application. So for Dewin, what drives us forward? Well, we want to see Wales driving this forward, and we need to act fast. I would really like to see more and more people get up and running in this sector. It's a diversification opportunity. It's a way of keeping young people in rural areas. We really need to speak and act confidently and in a way that we can take this technology on. my colleague or a friend in Bangor University, Dr. Edward Jones, recently did a study through a Nuffield scholarship into agri-tech companies. And of, I think, around 65 companies he studied in detail, none of them were started by farmers. They're all started by techies, which is great, but we need to address the balance. I do want to see more engagement between technical people. I do call them techies because I've got a lot of admiration for what they do, and it's not in any means diminishing the value. It's the techies community. We need to engage with them so that they understand farming and farmers understand the technical community. I guess lastly, to sort of a couple of points to put out there to encourage discussion. I have got some concerns about how this technology fits in the larger food systems environment, and with Ben having mentioned education or mentioned what barriers there are, or maybe there was a reference to education previously, then I think the new curriculum in Wales, which has been rolled out at the moment following the Donaldson review, is a fantastic opportunity for us to really empower and allow our young people, children, to think they can do this here. They don't have to go away. By all means, we can go away and come back, but we really need to get rid of this idea, old-fashioned idea by now, that we've got to go out of Wales to do something in the technical world. We can do it right here. There's nothing stopping us. It's largely how we frame things, our mindset, getting engaged and talking with other people. Yeah, I guess that's a bit of a pick and mix of thoughts there to encourage discussion and giving you a bit of insights to Dewin. I'm not going to talk too much about Dewin because you can go on LinkedIn, Instagram and Twitter to learn more about dewin.tech. I'll leave it there, I think, Rhian.
That's excellent. Thank you, Geraint. Wonderful. Some big topics there, but sort of a great sort of few moments to end on there to kind of capture a lot of the themes that I think we want to bring out in the Q&A. So thank you all very much. I've jotted down a few things. So in the chat, Ben Jones did put in what, of course, is the big ticket question. So we've heard a lot about different technologies and different approaches. Question is, how do you get them to market? And the barriers. I think I'd like to ask each of you individually about, firstly, early adopters. So for each of you have mentioned a lot of different potential products and services that can come to market, but who, for you in your business, and again, who are the early adopters, or what sort of character sort of represents an early adopter for you, and how far can you get with the early adopters? If we go around the room, so Alison, speaking from a university perspective, in Bristol University, can you give us a few thoughts really as to the sort of companies the university works with that give us that picture of that early adopter company?
Yeah. So obviously, as a university, our main interest is the academic research. We're identifying the opportunities, what could be done, and if there's a challenge, then we work through schemes like Innovate with the companies setting or interested in that company, in that challenge, to try to find a resolution. Typically, at our scale, it would be the fundamental research, the early TRL level. I think, as you've heard from both Paul and Michael about how IBERS and Germinal and Terravesta work together to take breeding targets forward. I mean, is an excellent example of that. Paul was talking about the high sugar grasses. It was a combination of having plant and animal scientists together in discussion with breeders in the same place that enabled that advancement to be made, with everybody contributing ideas, thinking, well, if we did this, could we do this? Can we do this? Can we incorporate these various things to take it on? So at an academic level, we can make the crosses, we can identify them in small scale, And then when it shows progress, it's over to Paul and his team to do the scale up, to do that, not quite market testing, but doing the work that shows, is it going to be marketable? Is it going to be profitable? Is it worthwhile taking this forward? I mean, that's one example. I mean, Michael mentioned Beacon. I mean, we work with a lot of companies doing proof of concept work on valorization of products. And increasingly, this is valorization of what we would typically think of pasture offtake for animal feed, other uses of that offtake. And again, what are the key characteristics that you need in that offtake to make the end product as excellent as it can be? So I would say that that's very much our engagement to sort of TRL 3-4 level, and then scale up from then is over to the companies, but very, very interested, always in working in combination, in collaboration through schemes such as Innovate.
Great, thank you, Alison. Paul, do you have a comment there? Who's your early adopter? Because you mentioned sort of how do you get the technology adopted on farm, and a few people have mentioned sort of how willing farmers. I think Geraint mentioned, if there's something in it for the farmer, then it will get used. But for you, who are the early adopters, Paul?
Go back one stage on that and just comment on something Alison said there. I think she's right. The big barriers to me, or one of the big barriers we've had in the past, is adaptation. So we're getting new tech, but it has to be in a form and in a way that a farmer can use it. It has to actually be demonstrated that it is of use on the farm rather than just in the laboratory. So what we've done recently, we set up a new initiative called Germinal Horizon, which is working with the plant breeders at IBERS. We now have a farm demonstration site in Wiltshire. So we take material from there and we put it onto the farm demonstration site in Wiltshire, where we're still doing trials, but we're looking at trials on fertilizer, on weed control, on how farmers will actually use this, rather than just the technology itself, how it will integrate into their systems. And then we take that from there, we run it onto 2 or 3 farm sites on commercial scale sites, so field scale demonstration work, looking at rough measurements with farmers and how they adopt it. And then we take it to the next stage, is we take a group, we try to get about 40 to 50, 60 farmers across the UK to then look at it, so we can get different topographies, different geographies, different soil types, different management systems, all looking at that same technology. So as an example of that is one of the ones I mentioned earlier, which is this fescue crossed with perennial ryegrass from North America. So that was developed at IBERS by the plant breeders there. That's great. So we've had that on our farm in Wiltshire now for a while, looking at how we integrate that into mixtures, what we put it with, how we present it to a farmer. We sowed it a year ago on a dairy farm in Devon on light sand, and on a really drought-stricken sheep farm in Lincolnshire. And we've got great farmer comment from those people. So we've got farmers looking at it, and they come back to us with ideas saying, you could do this better, or you could do that better. If we did this, we could do this with it. And then about 6 weeks ago, we put it on social media. So we said on social media, we have something here that can possibly help you with drought situations on farm, with summer grass. Do you want a trial pack? Do you want 1 acre pack to put in your next reseed, put it down the middle of the field, and we'll have a look at it and give us some data, give us your feedback, give us your view. We wanted about 40 to 50 of those. We got 140 people apply. So there was definite requirement, there's definite feel there that they wanted, but we identified the problem. We've done a survey, we knew weather conditions were a problem, we knew drought was a problem, we knew we're getting a changing climate, farmers are facing that, they saw a solution, they want to try it. But they want to try it, not just dive straight into it, and I think that's a good way of doing it. Sure,
thank you, Paul. Michael, what about the Terravesta's experience, I suppose, with early adopters? Because your crops, miscanthus as a crop, as a non-food crop, there's another dimension to that, isn't there, in terms of who adopts that crop first?
Yeah, exactly. So I think we've kind of got new adopters at both ends of our supply chain. We're trying to encourage farmers to diversify their farm, to take those. We have to be very careful about how we describe the land. Historically, people always talked about marginal land, but marginal is such a vague term. It could be anything. It could be that field that floods every year and you can't get food crop out of it, or you can't get your machinery into it in the time of year you need to. You know, it could just be it is miles away from your farm, and the amount of time it takes you to drive to it, to fertilize it and do all the things you need to do becomes cost prohibitive. So actually identifying those growers and helping those learn which fields actually are those that could potentially be changed into a different cropping system is one of the challenges. Also, you know, helping farmers identify those fields that are maybe diminished and could do with a long, like, perennial crop to help restore that soil organic carbon is a big challenge as well. And actually, from the bioenergy sector, we have a long history of, you know, years ago, the government and lots of people encouraged people to grow bioenergy crops, but then never really put any effort into establishing an end market for those. So back years ago, we had lots of people growing these crops, and then they sat with nothing to do with it. That's exactly what happened with our chairman. He was encouraged to grow it and then found he had nothing to do with it. Hence why we set up Terravesta, to ensure that, you know, we encourage people to grow miscanthus, but we only do that with the insurance that there is an end use for it. All of that is power plant. And on the other end of that early adopters is people using biomass for new and interesting things. You know, through the AberInnovation campus and yourself, you know, we've met various spin-out companies from the university. We're looking at different, you know, types of sugar and different types of biochemistry that we could potentially slot into their supply chain and be that incoming. And I think as well, getting platforms and areas where we can let people try, like the AberInnovation campus and all the other innovation campuses around the country, where people can come in and trial technology on different feedstocks, is really important to actually get that biomass economy going.
Great, thank you for that plug, Michael. I appreciate it. No, I mean, pilot scale is one way to get some courageous early users through the door and get them sold on your idea and your technology. So, you know, that's great. Stephen, from your perspective then for Agxio, who are your early adopters? Because there's not just those that are operating sort of land, you know, managing land and what have you. There's also, is there a translational challenge there in terms of how you convey the technology you've got? Who adopts it first?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rhian. I guess I'm looking at Agxio. I guess there's sort of two. There seem to be sort of two lenses essentially that people look at what we're doing. In one lens, it's looking at us as an agri-tech and an agri-fintech type of company. So very much in Geraint's point earlier, people are asking what's the value? What's the value equation? But there's a huge spectrum there from the traditional farmer on the basis I've invested in something. Or I'm about to invest in something, and I'm not really quite sure why or what it will give me elements. And so we found in terms of the early adoption, there is a need to showcase in terms of the pilots quite extensively, and to work jointly with them in terms of going through that learning discovery. And separately, I know there was an early question around education. We also formed the Agxio Academy, so it's essentially to form essentially a digital education forum that the industry and we will grow hopefully together in terms of exploring more and more of those types of applications, traditional and controlled environments. The separate lens, however, is where people have recognized us, particularly through our artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies, as essentially a life sciences company, where they're looking to extend beyond purely the agricultural dimension. And we have literally the same technology platforms being a sort of challenge for us to develop, ranging from looking at disease in plants through to helping clear a COVID backlog in digital pathology, working with the NHS, through a whole spectrum in terms of working with, for example, researchers, including at Abbey University, in being able to add the extra level of intelligence through particularly machine learning elements, so things like fecal egg count or the fluke issues, being able to highly automate what is still in many countries, including the UK, a heavily manual process, or has limitations in terms of the number of specialists available. So what we try to do is we try to essentially use the technologies to hardwire an extra chip, essentially in researchers' brains, essentially for what they're trying to do, and that I think is a very encouraging way of getting some of the early adoption gain as co-projects.
Brilliant, thank you, Stephen. And Geraint, from your perspective then, I know your company's just starting out, but you'll definitely have your eye on those early adopters and those first customers. Who are they for you? And
they tend to drive a Tesla. They've got an iWatch. It's those kind of people, I think. Those are the early adopters, and they're always thirsty for new technology. I'm not sure, and I guess we're, in one sense, an early adopter as a type of company. What worries me is it's not a very profitable space to be in as an early adopter. It's the second mouse that gets the cheese, as they say. But we've got to start somewhere, and I think the view we're taking, looking at how other successful technical companies have invested and developed, is it's an element of a freemium model where you've got to get your technology out there, people talking about it. We're self-funding the open close entirely ourselves, so it's a very, very, very puny budget compared to a major corporation. But we already understand we need to get people interested, and I think. You've got psychology come in here. I think how people and the theory of adaptation of technology. You always got the early pioneers. The issue with early pioneers, okay, they'll be fine to work with you now, but they'll be off to the next thing in a year's time. So I'm not sure whether we should be concentrating a lot of time and energy with them, but mostly just to get the brand and the technology out there. And I think maybe just a point is sort of linked here. I think to try and think what can we do to try and increase the chance of Agritech having a legacy in Wales, because this is the theme of the workshop this morning. So if we're thinking in Cymru itself, I think a good idea I've heard, and there's very, very few original ideas. They're usually stolen or borrowed from somewhere else. And one idea I saw was the idea of data corps, where I think that would be a very smart move on behalf of the farming industry, would be to put structure in place now to try and manage and optimize the data that will very soon be generating in huge quantities from farms. And personally, I would like farmers to be very much in the forefront of managing and ownership of that, because at the moment we are seeing some very smart moves by large companies that just ties up the data, and we will pay the price later on. So that's just a few thoughts.
There we are. Great. Thank you. No, thank you very much. There's a few, because time, of course, is whizzing. I thought we had loads of time, but now 11:30 is coming up hot on our heels. But I want to cover a couple of topics, and then Rhian Thomas has put something in the chat that we should address as well. So I'd like to cover with you for skills. I really want your thoughts perhaps on skills or skills gaps, or just whatever comes to your mind in terms of what we'd want to tell those that are listening to us today about skills. I also want your thoughts, and I don't mean to be at all sort of contentious here, but I'd like to know your thoughts on how government can support and help the deployment of agricultural solutions in whatever role, whether that's legislative or from funding perspective, or it's affecting culture change. Any just thoughts on that, and then so we'll take those two. But Rhian Thomas's comment in the chat is about to help drive change with farmers, food producers. What are your thoughts about engaging with the food processors and retailers? So this is a really interesting question. Yes, Alison, definitely. So we've talked about farmers and our tech a bit. Let's take Rhian's first. So Alison, what about processors and retailers? How do we engage?
Well, I'll probably subvert the question slightly. We'll talk about process and research, but what I wanted to just highlight was that we've been talking a lot here about large data sets, modern technologies for managing agriculture, both arable and pasture-based, farmers collecting data on whether it's field quality, herd characteristics, whatever. There is I want to go back to your other question about government. There is a real need to recognise that agriculture is a STEM subject. And that is sadly lacking at the moment. We are using state-of-the-art technologies. We're going into AI, into predictive biology. we need the recognition that it's not somebody chewing a ear of corn in a field. We are high tech. And with that comes the need for skills training to enable the next generation to engage, to understand and to communicate at a multidisciplinary level. We need the farmers to be able to talk to the computer scientists. We need the land mappers to be able to explain what they've seen in a way that can be implemented. And I want to just make a plug for 2 training schemes that IBERS are involved in. So the BBSRC Food Biosystems DTP and the UKRI Food Systems Centre CDT. Now these are both post PhD training schemes. The latter one very closely integrated with the supply chain, and we have some of our industry members of that DTP present here, and thank you for that support. But the whole concept there is that the industry is involved in, again, identifying challenge-led postgraduate projects that will have really benefit going forward. So you provide that excellent skills training as well as producing somebody who will really make a sizable contribution going forward in the way that we need to.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. Yeah, no, I think that's great. So conscious that I'll probably get a chance just to speak with you once again during the course of the session. Just Alison, any thoughts from a university perspective or your own experience in terms of funding, public funding and how we use it to best effect, and have we got any gaps? I mean, we're all very conscious public sector wise that European funding, as we've known it for some time, will be coming to an end very soon, and what replaces that or how we improve upon that is right in the front of our minds. But any thoughts on that front?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, European funding has been incredibly important, and across European partners, we're facing the same challenges. There's a lot of synergism and especially with climate change, adaptation to different regions, how do different farming practices adapt and what is required. There's still a wish to work with our European partners, and that's not going to change, and actively involved in trying to look for those relationships and continue them where we can. The gaps in funding are a worry, and look forward to having some indication of what is possible in those areas. Funding is tight. Say at the university level, as we said, we're working at a different scale to the rest of the panel. We're looking at proof of concept, the ideas that might work, might not. The blue skies thinking and the funding for that, and we know that's pinched at national level as well. We've had enormous opportunity through things like GSRF, so working with the ODA countries to promote food security wider than the UK and Europe, and really want to continue with those good works in however we can.
Yeah, definitely. So if I continue our pattern as we've done it, so Paul, from your perspective and Germinal's perspective then, any thoughts on the skills that we need from new employees first, and then also any thoughts on government?
Lots.
I'm sure we have plenty of thoughts on government, but...
There's 2 skills first. We've actually just taken on quite a number of people, and including plant breeders, and what we have found extremely useful, and a bit of a plug again for you, Alison, is the university ran an advanced training partnership with Marty Spittle, doing MRESs, which could lead on to PhDs, and we've taken on a number of the people who have completed that. So that's distance learning courses, and they've been extremely useful, and we've got some really good people out of that. So I'll praise that as a route, because that's it's people in the industry already wanting to better themselves and improve themselves and get more qualifications, and that's really worked. And we have, as I say, got some really good people out of that. So that's where we have recently been employing. As far as government and funding is concerned, that we've been beneficiaries of a number of grants, and I'd like to thank BBSRC, Innovate UK, and of course Smart Company grants from Welsh Government, and we've had a couple of those, and they're really good. I was also very fortunate that I was able to put in some comments to George Freeman MP, who was producing the Tigger report for Boris Johnson on what to do post-Brexit, deregulation, etc. And one of the comments I put in there was on both on animal and plant research and the time it takes. And we started, I think, a conversation talking about the time it takes. If we go to Alison and we want to develop something, it's not going to be done in 5 years. It's going to be done in 15 or 20 years. It takes that long to introduce new concepts and breed them into plants, go through the regulatory system and get them out into commerce. So if your funding streams are between 2 and 5 years, and 5 years are difficult, most of them are 2 and 3 years, it doesn't really give you the opportunity. What can you do in 2 years if you're plant breeding? You can get one generation of improvement. That's all you can do, because you've got to go through that gestation period of growing a crop, producing the seed and resowing it. So to my mind, the biggest thing we could do is have a longer term view in this and trust our scientists to actually do work over a longer period of time, with reviews as you go along, of course. But if it's going to take, if we're doing a 10-year project, 10-year funding in that area would at least start the ball rolling and we could start to make good progress. So that would be my big cry to politicians. Can we have a bit more trust and a bit longer term funding and a longer term view in agriculture and in agricultural research?
Fantastic, Paul. And any comment, wanting to keep on Rhian's question there about, does Germinal engage with food processors and retailers?
Yeah, we do actually, and we've done some really good work, and I'm going to name check them because they've been really successful and they've put a lot of effort into it. So we've worked with the Waitrose supply chain and with Waitrose, so with Dalehead, Dovecote Park, Muller, so that's beef, lamb, and milk. And yes, we've done demonstration farms. We've done a lot of events out on farm to their supply chains, bringing their supply chains on board, talking about protein crops, how you can produce protein more effectively, and that has had good progress. But there's a lot more work to do there. The supply chains are strong, but farmers still have the independence to do what they want. So yeah, it's a route, and it's one we are using. It's not the only route, but it has been very successful with some supply chains. And I have to say, we're now talking with Sainsbury's and also with one or two of the others as well in that area.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Excellent. Michael, can I come to you now? So just to recap, so thoughts on skills and whether, or what the government can do to support your activities generally, not perhaps specifically, and then the food retailer question as well.
I think interdisciplinary skill training is really crucial. I say this as a computer scientist originally, who then switched over to IBERS to study plant breeding. I cover both sectors quite nicely, and I think actually getting people who have skills in both areas is very crucial. I think, we can be very closed off in computer science and we can sit and we can come up with all these wonderful ideas, but it goes back to what Paul was saying about the practicalities of deploying these on farm. I can sit in an office all day and type something into a computer, but without actually going out and standing in a field all day, I don't understand the practicalities of what I'm trying to build. And I think actually developing those skills and actual skills interchange of people working across different disciplines, I think is really key if we're going to move forward from an education point of view. On the funding point, Paul summed it up brilliantly. Breeding needs longer term investment. We constantly see these very short projects that are 2-3 years long, and especially in a perennial crop like miscanthus, which has a 2-3 year maturity phase. We're not even seeing a mature crop in that funding cycle. We've got no idea what we're breeding into in such a short period, and we need to see longer investment. And it's the same again. The government need to be investing in climate change technologies like BECCS, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, so that we can actually have this longer term plan and actually be able to do something. We've seen the government are starting to invest money now into, as I said before, this 23,000 hectare target, but it's a small drop in the ocean for what needs to be a massive ramp up in the next 3 years. So more investment in there would be crucial. And then from the processors point of view, obviously we don't engage with food processors ourselves, not being a food crop, but we are aware of many food, farmers who develop crops for food processors who are looking ways to mitigate their greenhouse gases. And that's where bioenergy can step in as a mitigation tool. And we work very closely again with end users and power plants to ensure that we can develop a stable biomass supply chain for future fuel production.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael, very much. Stephen, your thoughts on skills and government?
Thank you, Rhian. I guess if you look at the global agri-tech industry, one of the challenges is that it's full of thousands and thousands of point solutions. And I think one of the elements around, I guess, the opportunity for Wales and for the UK is essentially to be an incubator, to be a sort of lab to develop essentially some solutions that then could be deployed globally. But I think it's only going to do that if again it goes away from the point solution approach and is much more around connected ecosystems. So it's not about one company trying to have all of the skills to make it. It's about creating effective partnerships. And I think if you look at Wales, it's got world-class universities, it's world-class at farming, it's increasingly growing its reputation around technology. But I guess one of the challenges and observations which segues into the government element, which of course I'm going to be very careful on because they're obviously an investor in Agxio and very good friends of ours, but an observation, not just of the Welsh government, the UK government, and actually broader governments, is that the funding models are based on the old traditional models where it's very heavily driven around capital type of projects. So resonating with Paul, a lot of those are short-termist. Some of the research elements, again, can also be fairly short-termist and doesn't necessarily have the challenge around commercialization elements. But a lot of them around the essentially the big funding options are around capital, not intellectual capital elements. And I think actually in the agri-tech space, if we get this right, it isn't about labor arbitrage, robotics in farming. It's about new ideas, new innovation, that it's going to be much more in the IC space than the C. That was the point I'll make.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. And Geraint, for yourself on skills and government and also engaging with food processors or the food supply chain, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a big question. Big questions there. In terms of skills, yeah, if we are successful doing tech in a new sort of shape or form, it's a big if, that there is a lot of new startups in tech that don't, and I'm aware of that, but we're giving it a try. I know that we'd only regret for not having a try. But if we are successful and things start to move, then I am very much aware of one barrier we will face is getting our skills in. There's good work being done to try and address that. I'm not sure in our area, and a lot of rural areas, whether unemployment is an issue. Maybe it's not a politically correct thing to say, but I think there is employment out there, but maybe we need to look at the type of employment and in which sectors. And I think going back to the new curriculum that's been rolled out in Wales now with the Donaldson review, with the emphasis on learning through experience, the learning journey, we really need, I would like to see governments doing more to increase the awareness with everybody about the new curriculum, not just parents and schools, but business, because there's wonderful opportunities to form long-term relationship with local schools, and in the end that will help to address the recruitment drives, because children will see, wow, there's this going on in our own square mile. We need to inspire them to realize that this can happen in their area. So the producers, so the processors, and the retailers questioned by Eirion, and good to see Eirion, gobeithio cadw'n iawn Eirion. I think, yes, it's a possibility, but why can't we do it ourselves? Retailers and processors by nature tend to be multinationals, which have different priorities. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's fact. Why can't we get some organization within our own houses? I think the unions would be very good, well positioned to try and see what we can do to try and structure and try and encourage innovation. So I'd be a bit wary trying to give them even more power in the supply chain, which is already out of balance. You've got 5-6 companies in retail dominating all the thousands of farmers. So I'm just slightly wary or if that is the answer. It's probably part of the answer somewhere. But then with government, yes, I'm aware it's very easy to observe from the outside. I really like lots of the points that Stephen made there. What I do find quite often is that public sector or public funded bodies will try and innovate internally with their own staff, which I've got big question marks about the effectiveness of, really, from observing. if that technology could then be spin off in a commercialization plan, you could sort of accept that, but that doesn't seem to happen. And I think it's largely because they don't have the freedom or a small budget, even a small budget of £20,000 in relation to a body, to allow them to procure technology from startups, to take the risk, because I do think that innovation tends to be better within a private sector environment, but not to disregard public sector to have a role. So that is, I think, something I see time and time again. It's very easy to allocate staff time if you're a budget holder within public sector, but it's very difficult to get your hands on cash to support startups within Cymru or within your own area. Politics, what drives me crazy at the moment, Rhian, is the Save the Union politics that is sucking time and energy. If you look at the fallout from Brexit, there's some very dirty tricks going on, which does have implications on businesses on the ground, because there's so much time and energy I can see the Welsh government's putting in trying to address some very dirty tactics. I can't. It's okay for me to use quite strong words because I'm not politically affiliated, but as a small business, it really drives me crazy. With the post-Brexit funding of the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is deliberately bypassing Welsh government, it's childish. It's arrogant, it's disrespectful, it really, really drives me crazy, because we will lose opportunities because of dirty politics going on like that. So if there is politicians listening, I'm not sure who's the audience. Maybe if I saw the audience, maybe I'd be a bit more a change, but that's my feeling. And then maybe one to finish off, I would add weight to Stephen's point about creating ecosystems for businesses to flourish. We've got two great examples I'm aware of, which is yours, Rhian, in AberInnovation, and the one closer to me here, which has got similar principles, the Midnight Science Park in Geraint. Fantastic, that's the kind of thing we need to see more and continue to be supporting. So hopefully government will continue to support that kind of approach.
Brilliant. Thank you, Geraint. And I appreciate that from everyone at AberInnovation and MSpark. So, okay, we are out of time. So I would like to thank all of our panelists. I suspect there are lots of topics we covered today we could debate and discuss at great length, but hopefully we've given the audience, everyone listening, a good taste of all the sort of agri-tech solutions that are coming down the line for the future, and maybe some guidance on where to put a spare £100 if they've got it in their back pocket. I think I've got some good suggestions I've jotted down here. I want to thank you all for your time as panelists and wish you the very best of luck turning out these new solutions for the future, and very much appreciate your input today into the discussion and the debate. So I think we'll close there and wish you all a very good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners.